Okay, now back to our regular program. Thank you again for attending our February dinner meeting. I am Andrew Yip, the president of the City Club this year, and I'm proud to introduce the current board members. Let me start with the first vice president, Jeff Fadley. Please remain standing and hold your applause. Second vice president, Dan Bowles. Dan. Secretary Frank Chen is not here tonight. Our treasurer, Donna Mann. Donna somewhere. Arrangements co-chair, we have David Wang and Jim Frawley. Somewhere? At the back. Communications co-chair, Pat Cathcart and Dick. Oops. Out of battery. Okay, I think my voice is loud enough. Correct? At the back? Okay, we have Dick Pearson. Can you try? Membership co-chair, Janet Morgan. Janet at the back. Kathy Matsumoto. Our social co-chair, David Studfield. And Soma Warner. And of course, our immediate past president, Pete Leffler. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2013 Board of Directors. No? Okay, our board would not be here without recognizing the City Club past presidents. Each past president has spent 7 years serving the board, and many of them continue to find other ways to serve the club and the community. Please remain standing when I call your name, and please hold your applause. Going back in time, 2012, Pete Leffler.
The mic's dead right now, I'm fixing it.
Janice Lee McMahon. Elbow. Mort Mortimer. John Morris. Tom Sandley. Wally Roswell. Bill Barry. Chuck Adams. Bill Payne. Dick Ward. Good. Wow. Thank you, Jim, again, for the rescue. And last but not least, Lynn Reitnauer. Thank you to all the past presidents. And next, let me introduce San Marino city officials and city representatives. Oh, this is loud. New battery. Enjoy it. We have City Council member, Vice Mayor Dick Ward. Thank you, Dick. No, it doesn't work. Shut down again.
Did it die again?
Yeah.
Keep working on it.
Our city treasurer, Marina Wang. Our city manager, John Schaefer. The one that keep our city clean and look beautiful, our planning and building director, David Saldania. Our police chief, Tim Harrigan. Our fire chief, again, is Jim Frawley. He's working hard, fixing the mic. and City Librarian Anne Delavalli. And we have School Board Member Lisa Link. Our San Marino High School Athletic Director Andrew Gale. Andrew. And I'm always proud that our monthly dinner meetings are well attended by leaders from other groups. Tonight we have the Chamber of Commerce President Joanna Jimenez. Is Joanna here? No? Okay. San Marino Historical Society President John Morris. John is here. And San Marino Rotary Club President Isaac Hung. Is Isaac here? No? Okay. Our monthly dinner meeting is a great platform to have our members and guests to come to meet each other, to share ideas, and to talk to the city leaders. With that said, I want to bring up our membership co-chair, Janet Morgan, to introduce new members. Janet?
It's gonna work this time.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? No? That's good. Superintendent. Superintendent. Okay. I miss one important VIP, our superintendent, Lauren Kleinrock. Yay! Okay, back to Janet.
I know, and he was kind of my boss when I was PTA president, so I have to make sure he's take good care of Lauren, one of my favorite people. Welcome, and just a quick reminder and a thank you to everybody that every member of this club is part of our membership committee, and quite a few of you have done your part and brought guests and friends, and our board has been inviting guests and getting people to join us. So I just want to let you know how much we all appreciate getting you members and encourage you to continue to do that. Bring a friend, bring somebody, a friend, a neighbor, as many of you have done to our meetings, and it'll help us grow our membership. I have 4 new members to introduce this evening. And I'll do it alphabetically. I'll start with Frances Bangery. Frances, why don't you come on up while I introduce you. Frances was born in Boston. She has both a bachelor's and a master's from Boston College, but I think she decided the weather there maybe wasn't quite as desirable, so she moved to Southern California. She worked in transportation management for over 40 years and retired from the City of Los Angeles as general manager of transportation, but now she consults in transportation management. She's lived in San Marino for 27 years. Her husband is a USC professor, and her children, Jack and Joya, are both married. And so she's joined us, and we're really glad she's here. So welcome to Frances. Jose Kerr, everybody knows Jose. Hi, Jose. Jose is a graduate of South Pasadena High School. He's a 17-year employee of San Marino High School. He's currently activities director and yearbook teacher. He lives in San Gabriel with his wife, Summer, and she's also a teacher. He's a member of the San Marino Masonic Lodge, and he enjoys reading, traveling, cooking, and his 2 dogs. Welcome, Jose. And next, Andrew Gale. I know we have good representation from San Marino High School. Now, Andrew was actually born in Loma Linda. I didn't know this about Andrew, and raised in San Marino since the time he was about 5. He graduated from San Marino High School in 1999. He played football, basketball, and ran track. He graduated from Linfield College with a bachelor's in history. He's a health and PE teacher at San Marino High School and athletic director and Rio Hondo League president. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. The RHL, I had to remember back to my And he's the son of Bob Gale, enjoys golf, reading, and spending time with his wife, Rochelle, son Spencer, and daughter Olivia. Welcome, Andrew. And finally, Stephanie Patterson. And Stephanie wrote me a really long bio, but Stephanie, I can't read the whole thing, but she's done a lot of amazing stuff. Really glad to have her. Realtor with Sotheby's International Realty in Pasadena. She was born in Santa Rosa, attended Cal, and has lived in San Marino since 1973. Both her sons went through San Marino schools, and she was an active volunteer in the schools. Her son Trevor works with her in real estate, and he's a USC law grad. She serves on the executive board of the USC Medical Faculty, Family, and Friends, and they raise money for scholarship funds for medical students. She enjoys reading and bridge, and she's going to take up golf. So welcome to our new members.
He's clean. I've seen this.
It's not an iPhone.
Okay.
See, technology's so outdated.
1, 2, 3. It clicks?
All right.
See what you think.
Sorry, guys. All right, thank you. And I'll get you guys your pins right now.
Okay, thank you, Janet, for introducing new members. One of City Club's main event is the President's Party. It's coming up this Saturday. And let me bring up our social co-chair, David Stutfield, to give us an update. David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are all set for Saturday night at the San Gabriel Country Club. I was over there today, and it's just beautiful. We're going to have great, let me not push this here, great food, great music. We have a live band, the Rescue Principal we've had for a number of years. Great company because many of you will be there. And we're celebrating the centennial, which only comes along every 100 years or so. So any of you who have not RSVP'd me or Soma Warna, where are you? Over here somewhere. If your plans have changed and you're able to make it, let us know. We'd love to have you. We're just raring to go, and it's going to be a great evening. It's going to be a lot of fun. So let me know if you are available, and we'll sign you up. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you, David. David spent a lot of time on this, so hope to see many of you this Saturday night. This is all the announcements for tonight. And now let me bring up the first Vice President, Jeff Fadley, to introduce our speaker.
History isn't just events and dates. It is actions of people. Our speaker tonight, Chief Tim Harrigan, will talk about the notorious crimes, scandalous dealings, and story behind the history of the city of San Marino. Sometimes odd, sometimes offbeat, and sometimes just astounding. Our chief will provide us with the backstory of San Marino's history as ripped from the pages of the San Marino Tribune, council meetings, and other illustrious sources that he has yet to name. Chief Harrigan received his BA at Laverne University, his master's at California State Northridge, and is a graduate of the FBI National Executive Academy. Chief Tim Harrigan started his law enforcement career with the San Marino Police Department in October of 1983. Prior to that, he served as one of the San Marino's first paramedics. In Chief Harrigan's 29-plus years on the force, his policeman's instinct, combined with his love of history, has taken him through the San Marino's past in a most unusual way. Please welcome Chief Tim Harrigan.
Good evening. Let me see if I can get this just right here. Can everybody hear me? Great. I see a lot of friendly faces here, which is nice. Normally you would thank people at the end of a program, but I just want to make sure that I recognize some people up front here first. First of all, I would like to thank you, the community, for allowing me to serve and perhaps supporting one of the finest cities here in the nation. I do appreciate that. Secondly, I'd like to thank the City Club Board and especially Jeff Fadley for inviting me to speak in this special centennial year. I look forward to this. And thirdly, I'd like to especially thank the police department staff. Could I have you all stand and perhaps we give them an applause? Have some in the back as well. They really do a great job. Your citizens really are fortunate. Thank you. Most of tonight's dialogue is going to be from the incorporation up through, in 1913, up through the present. But to really have an appreciation and understand what went on in San Marino, you have to have, from a historical perspective, an understanding of the things that went on and what led up to the incorporation. Imagine it's 8,000 years ago. And the San Gabriel Valley, from the mountains south, east, and west, is nothing but a vast wilderness full of oak trees, pines, grasslands, streams teeming with native trout, lakes with a myriad of fish and fowl, game of every kind, bear, elk, deer, fox. These were the lands in the area that in part would become San Marino, settled by the Tongva Indians, later to be known as the Gabrielino Indians. The birth of San Marino and the surrounding area began with the San Gabriel mission. It was the fourth such mission in a series of 21 that laid the groundwork for San Marino. Transitions in development brought forth and marked the San Gabriel Valley, turning large rancheros with roaming cattle to farmland, growing citrus trees, walnuts, vines, producing grapes. These in turn turned into suburban communities with their own identities, which eventually led to incorporation. San Marino is just one such story. I've been asked a few times, are you going to tell us where all the dead bodies are buried? And usually my first quip is, well, you mean besides Lorraine Road? But actually, you are sitting and I'm standing on perhaps many of these. Before Huntington School was built in 1918, it was called the Cooper Ranch. And a number of years before that, it was called the Pear Orchard, which was part of the San Gabriel Mission. And then many years before that, it was an Indian village that was inhabited by, if I can pronounce this correctly, the Sissiskanaga Indian tribe. And this tribe, for the most part, was a peaceful tribe, relatively just hunter-gatherers, but they did have some enemies. And when they captured their enemies, they would bring them to their village, They'd torture them, and many of them were buried on these grounds that surround where we're at now and over at the Huntington. Back when the Huntington was built back in 1918, there was talk about excavating, and they apparently had excavated a certain amount of it, but I don't think the tribes at the time were as powerful as they are today, and they needed to get a school built, and Huntington School was built. So never really excavated those Indian grounds. So we'll start with one of the first big crimes, and perhaps one of my favorites, because I like old westerns and such, but this involves an area-wide manhunt. It involves a couple other noted people in San Marino, one by the name of Hugo Reed. Hugo Reed was a very successful businessman here in the area of San Marino, which would be settled, entrepreneur, kind of a wise guy. He ended up marrying one of the chief's daughters. Her name was Victoria. Well, in 1843, Hugo Reed was elected Justice of the Peace of this particular territory. Well, at the same time, there was what was called a renegade Indian by the name of Joaquin. And Joaquin was essentially a bad guy. Joaquin had done some violent, despicable things in the area, and it was up to Hugo Reed to try and figure out how are we going to get this Indian. Joaquin had been a ward of the court, a ward of the missions. He had escaped from that. He had refused inculcation into the settlements, into the secularization of the missions at the time. But another noted thing about Joaquin is he kind of had an odd look to him. He was easily recognized as he had an iron brand on his lip, and one of his ears had been cropped. And the lore has it this was due to as discipline from one of the ranchers in the area at the time. Well, Hugo Reed, again being Justice of the Peace, wasn't really up to this task, so he solicited another kind of well-known San Marinian, would become so, by the name of B.D. Wilson, Benjamin D. Wilson. Well, Benjamin D. Wilson, which would later on also be known as Don Benito, so I'll kind of use those names interchangeably, so if you hear me use Don Benito, we're referring to B.D. Wilson, one and the same. So he set out with about 22 men to track down this renegade Indian Joaquin. They started out going east. They went up the Santa Ana River. Remember, they're back on horseback at this time, so they're a few days into this. They're going up the Santa Ana River, and Don Benito is kind of a man of action. He gets a little frustrated. He grabs one of the other men, leaves the rest of the men, gets about a day or so ahead of the group, up the river, and what's coming south is a group of 4 Indians. Well, Don Benito, prior to being kind of a successful man of the era, he was also an expert tracker, frontiersman, trapper, and an expert marksman as well. So he sees these other 4 Indians coming down the river, and he kind of, as they get close enough, he eyes and notices that one of them has an iron brand and a cropped ear. Immediately, he kind of eyes him. Well, Joaquin the Indian sees Don Benito and kind of realizes, well, this isn't going to be a very nice guy. He's looking for me or looking for somebody. So simultaneously, as lore has it, Don Benito pulled out his rifle, pointed it at Joaquin. At the same time, Joaquin pulls his bow and arrow. Don Benito fires around, hits Joaquin in the chest, through the heart, killing him instantly. But Joaquin, also being a good shot, hits Don Benito in the shoulder, and again, being on horseback, it took several days to get back. Apparently suffered some type of infection, but was able to survive that. And that kind of built the lore of B.D. Wilson and Don Benito for the era. Another story that you can't talk about San Marino lore without talking about the old mill and perhaps the legend of the buried treasure at the old mill. The old mill was completed in 1810 to 1816, that era. It was built as a grist mill originally, but it was also built as a fortress. As many of you that have been there, you notice that there's parts of it where the walls are up to 5 feet thick, built to withstand earthquakes. It was just built, that's why it's still standing today, 100 years or so later. But some of you may not know, it was also built as a stockade and used as a jail for some of the renegade Indians at the time. Also, it was used to keep some of the valuables of the missions, and then some of the valuables belonging to the large rancheros when they would go away and travel. Some of these valuables would be kept at the old mill, and they would be under the care of an old German miller who was kind of the caretaker at the time of the old mill. Well, the story goes that this German miller would take these valuables and he would place them. Some would be buried outside near oak trees, and some would be buried in the walls. And he had these secret little places, but he kept pretty, meticulous records of where he kept all of these treasures. Well, at one point, there was an attempted robbery, and this German miller was stabbed to death. And with him was lost all these meticulous records of where all these treasures were kept. So that kind of began the story and the lore of the treasure of the old mill. Well, the myth never really died, and in the late 1870s, they were doing some excavation around the old mill, and they uncovered a casket belonging to an old Franciscan priest. And in the dirt surrounding this casket, they found a bunch of these old gold coins. So again, this raised the question about, the legend of the buried treasure at the old mill. Is there really a treasure here? And kind of got people going again on this. And then later on, in the approximately 1829, they were doing some excavation up at around Cumberland and Gainsborough, doing some home development up in that area. Well, as they were digging, they came across a 6-foot tunnel. So apparently this, again, brought up the myth. Was this the tunnel that led from the old mission up to the old mill? Those were questions that were asked, and people started asking, coming out again. They actually had to build a fence around this big tunnel area to keep people away for quite a while. They had some experts come in, and archaeologist people came, took a look. They did find some old nails and old tools that were approximately from the early 1800s. So again, this kept the myth going of, is there a buried treasure here? Well, as today, there's still that myth. I've been here nearly 30 years. I haven't heard of anybody finding any of the treasure, but the myth is still out there. Anyway, I'm kind of limited on time, so we're going to move quickly into the modern era. For us, that begins in 1913 with the incorporation. Let me get my PowerPoint going here. As you know, much of the development of the San Gabriel Valley was due to the railroad in connecting communities such as Monrovia, Sierra Madre, Pomona, downtown Los Angeles. If you were here last month, you heard Mort speak very eloquently and give us a lot of information about Huntington building his Pacific Electric. Did I do something?
Nope.
Building his Pacific Electric, kind of connecting these communities together. Well, at approximately that time, maybe a few years earlier, communities such as Pasadena, South Pasadena, and Alhambra had already incorporated. I think Pasadena around 1886 or something like that had incorporated. Well, these three communities were coveting the lands that would become San Marino. So in a preemptive strike, a man by the name of Henry Huntington, along with 5 other men, set out to incorporate and build a city. And enough signatures were obtained, and on April 12th, 1913, an election was held with an incorporation date of April 25th, 1913. However, the first meeting wasn't held until May 15th of 1913, and this was held at the Patton Estate. And the story goes, so I've heard, that it was held in the basement of the Patton Estate. And I don't know if it just says this because it adds to the clandestine appeal to it, but that's the story, that it was in the basement of the Patton Estate. Attending that first board meeting, Board of Trustees, today you would know them as a city council, but attending that first board meeting were Richard H. Lacey, a businessman, William L. Valentine, also a successful businessman, Edward H. Cronendike, a banker, Edwin G. Hart, a realtor and developer, and George S. Patton, an attorney. What a great group of men to build a city. So I can just imagine being in the basement of the Patton Estate, and here's these 5 men, and I can just assume that Henry Huntington was in that room as well, off to the side, watching over what was occurring. So here are these 5 men having some dialogue. So we've just incorporated. We are a city now. What do we do? What should be some of our first decisions, our first actions? Well, the first motion made by Mr. Lacey and seconded by Mr. Hart was to choose Mr. Valentine as the temporary chair of the meeting. The second motion made by Mr. Lacey and seconded by Hart was to choose George S. Patton as San Marino's first president of the Board of Trustees. That would be analogous to today's mayor. The third motion made by these group of men, the third thing they did was appoint Norbert Murray as the city's first city marshal. That's how important they thought law enforcement and public safety was. It was at the core of the inception of this city. In June of 1913, City Hall was established at the northeast corner of Oak Knoll and Lopez Street. Many of you may know that Lopez Street was renamed later to be Monterey Road. This was the old Mayberry house here I have on the PowerPoint. 2 months later, in July, Norbert Murray resigned, and C.C. Cole was appointed the city's city marshal. And he was asked to visit every resident in the city of San Marino, leave his business card, and report back to the Board of Trustees. Well, I was appointed July 1, and I felt I'd kind of take on C.C. Cole a little bit here, and I figured, well, if I can get about 120 of you into a room at once, I can get this going a little bit quicker. So, Councilman Ward, I'll be getting back to you soon on this. You know, to give you a feel of what it would have been like to attend some of these early meetings, I'll quickly mention some of the items discussed and voted on. At its board's October meeting, the city seal was incorporated. Along with that, taxes were discussed. Obviously, you needed money to build a city. And an ordinance prohibiting the discharge of firearms in the city of San Marino was enacted. On a motion made by Mr. Lacey, the city was authorized to purchase 1 Indian for city use. Well, this was an Indian motorcycle at the time. October of 1915, the city marshal appointed all trustees as deputy marshal and gave them all the rights thereof. You know what this meant? They could carry guns. All right, quickly on to the Roaring 20s. A new lot was exchanged by Huntington, and the building of the city's City Hall took place at the corner of Huntington Drive and Olive Street. Olive Street would be renamed later on to San Marino Avenue. In 1920, Ben F. Parker was appointed Deputy City Marshal. I'll come back to Ben F. Parker and talk about him in a little bit. You know, it's interesting to note throughout the 20s, going through the archives, meeting after meeting with the Board of Trustees was dedicated to nothing but building this city. Lots were subdivided. Sewers were put in place. Roads were paved. Street lights went in. Fire hydrants went in. The founders were building this city throughout the 20s. In April of 24, Southwestern Military Academy was established by Lieutenant Maurice Veranda. May 5th, 1924. This one's a little odd. I'm not sure what was going on, but there was a special meeting called by the board to enact an ordinance regulating the burial and prohibiting the cremation of dead bodies in San Marino. I don't know if people were just going out their backyard, digging a hole and dumping the body in, so they needed an ordinance. I'm not sure, but that was an ordinance enacted. On a serious note, December of 24, that same year, a resolution of the Board of Trustees for an exemption permitting the burial of Arabella Huntington on the grounds of his estate. And 3 years later, on May 23rd, 1927, Henry Huntington passed away. To give you an idea of how important and how involved Huntington was into the building of this city, I'd like to just quickly read to you some of the opening remarks made at a Board of Trustees meeting. Trustee Valentine offered the following. Be it resolved that we, the members of the Board of Trustees of San Marino, record with profound sorrow the death of our fellow citizen and friend, Mr. Henry Edwards Huntington, which occurred in the city of Philadelphia on Monday last, the 23rd day of May. We declare that it is particularly appropriate that the official records of our municipality express the happening of the sad event and pay tribute to the memory of its founder and first citizen. Henry Huntington joined his wife in internment on the Huntington grounds. And again, 1 month later, Trustee Valentine offered profound words of sorrow at the death of fellow trustee and founder, George S. Patton. Well, I cannot let the City Club, especially as a member, go unmentioned in this historical account. On July 10th, 1929, Colonel Edward Bailey appeared before the Board of Trustees on behalf of the City Club of San Marino in regard to the unmanageable termite condition in the city of San Marino. Okay, I'm sorry. Huntington and Patton have just passed away. The city fathers are trying to build a city. Termites? Ben Parker. I mentioned that I'd come back to him. Ben Parker was appointed the city's first chief of police in 1927. Ben Parker was a colorful character. First, he was a big guy, tall, over 6 feet tall. And he always wore a big Texan 10-gallon hat. And the weapon of choice, the weapon he would carry, was a double-barrel, sawed-off, pistol-gripped shotgun. I brought that gun. The original gun is over here on display. If you get a chance, take a look at it. Ben Parker didn't believe in these little pansy pistols, as he might have called them. But everybody respected Ben Parker. And he rode around on this motorcycle with a sidecar. I suspect it was probably that Indian the city had purchased several years before. You know, it's interesting that many years ago in the early 90s, I came across some of this memorabilia, if you get a chance to look at it, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. But I found all these memorabilia in boxes underneath things and dusty, and we were getting ready to do our remodel in the mid-90s, and a lot of this was scheduled to be tossed out, and I started digging through it and found some of these things. And the shadow box that I built there, it's been in my office ever since. And I can say it's my office now because now I'm the chief, but after I built it, all the chiefs always say, oh no, it's going in my office. So as a lieutenant and a captain, I never got to hang it in my office. So now it is. All right, on to one of the first big scandals in San Marino. We're going to talk about Kaiser Folly. Many of you may know that Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany had an estate here in San Marino. The address was 984 Old Mill Road. Well, when the estate was built, it was built to be a fortress. It was built of heavy, heavy concrete. There was heavy steel that was imported from Germany when it was built. This place was fortified. There's even rumor that it had gun placements on the property itself of this estate. Well, it was used as the German consulate up through World War I, when it was seized by the U.S. government as alien property. It was returned back to the German government in the early 20s and 30s, where lore has it that it was used as a house of gambling and used for bootlegging and other illicit behavior. And be it noted that this was during the era of Prohibition. Well, World War II came around, and it was again seized by the U.S. government as alien property. And eventually it was never returned back to Germany. In fact, towards the end of World War II, it was burned to the ground, perhaps by some individuals retaliating against the Nazi regime at the time. But just a piece of lore there that Kaiser Wilhelm did have an estate here in San Marino. November of 1928, another scandal polarizes San Marino. A petition was presented to the Board of Trustees signed by 8 property owners living adjacent to the Southwestern Military Academy, protesting against the excessive noises in connection with the institution. I kind of wonder what little Kenny was doing at that time to bring ire to the residents in the area. Also, the city engineer came before the Board of Trustees and called attention to the worn and tattered condition of the city's original cloth map and asked that a new paper map be requisitioned. I'd love to know where this cloth map, this is in the archives, where this cloth map is. Should maybe connect with John Morse and see if maybe the Historical Society has it, but I just love to see this piece of history. Newspaper headlines: another scandal rivets the community. The San Marino gambling house. Throughout the 20s, Ben Parker, chief of police, and the Pasadena police chief were kind of at wits' end about this San Marino gambling house. You know, some people said that the chiefs were in the pockets of those that patronized this house of repute, but Ben Parker really did want to do something about it. It was called the gambling house. Apparently there was bootlegging there. There was other illicit behavior. But Ben Parker wanted to do something, but the problem was the front yard of the house up to the front door was in San Marino, but the rest of the house was in Pasadena. So the Pasadena police chief didn't want to come down to San Marino, go up the footsteps, across the lawn, kick down a door in San Marino to arrest people in Pasadena. Likewise, Ben Parker didn't want to walk up the footsteps, go in the front door into Pasadena and arrest people. Well, after much protest, the federal government came in and got involved and made a raid. And in this raid, as the paper quotes, there were 15 San Marino men arrested and a number of rich San Marino women. They confiscated over $5,000 in roulette wheels, dice tables, and other card tables. The house was abandoned for a number of years and was used, I guess, as a place for some of the neighbor kids to go through. Apparently there was supposedly a lot of secret hiding places and trap doors and such within this house. But in 1952, the house was torn down, and that kind of ended the story of the San Marino gambling house. Moving on to the 1930s. Probably the most highly published crime in San Marino was the Herbert D. Ivy $72,000 or else case. Herbert D. Ivy was the president of Citizens Trust and Savings Bank in Los Angeles, and he lived at 1590 Shenandoah Road, which is just north of Huntington Drive. Well, one night, Mr. Ivy and his wife are at home, and they receive a phone call. The person on the phone states that he needs to deliver a package to the house, as this package has been damaged, and Mr. Ivy needs to inspect this package. Well, Mr. Ivy was a little bit taken back because normally he would have all of his mail and deliveries at the bank in Los Angeles. But this person was insistent that he needed to deliver this package tonight. So a short time later, the doorbell rings, and Mrs. Ivy, who was at her husband's side, who was a little bit eerie as well about this, instead of opening the door wide open, they kind of open it a foot or so, and there's a man standing there with a package. And they say, "Yes, Mr. Ivy, you need to step outside so you can take a look at this package and inspect it." Well, Mr. Ivy kind of looks back at him and he says, "You know, why don't you just stay out there and open it for us?" So the man reaches into his pocket, Mr. Ivy thinking he's going to pull out a letter opener or a knife or something to open this packet. But he pulls out a .45 automatic weapon, orders Mr. Ivy to step outside or else. Well, Mrs. Ivy, who had been standing directly behind Mr. Ivy, slams the door shut. They're waiting to hear gunfire. That's what they're expecting. But instead, they hear running down the steps to the car, and as they look out the door, they see the man jump into the car and leave the area. Well, Mr. Ivy, Herbert Ivy, thought, well, we were saved on this one. This is over. We're pretty much done. But they did notify the police, and a report was taken, and one of the oddities was Mrs. Ivy reporting. She said, "You know, I would recognize this guy again because he had pig eyes." And that was her quote. This man had pig eyes. Well, the police at the time thought, I'm not sure if this is over. And sure enough, a few days later, they get a note. And in this note, it says that the only reason you didn't get the works is because the gun failed to go off. And you better do exactly as I say, or I'll kill you and your family. So the note had some instructions where they demanded $2,000 from every branch manager of this Citizens Trust Bank. And there was 36 branches, so totaling $72,000. So for the next 2 weeks, there were different notes that were exchanged, and in what they did was they would the suspect would leave notes in the local paper, Los Angeles Times at the time, in the wanted ads area, and leave notes as to what the individual was supposed to do. So for 2 weeks, they're exchanging these notes, and at one point, the individual has Mr. Ivy drive all over the San Gabriel Valley, and by then they had the police involved. The police chief had also gotten some of what then were called the G-men, federal men involved in this. And at one point, they had an officer, a San Marino officer, in the back of one of these cars in a rumble seat carrying a fully automatic weapon. They're sending them all over the San Gabriel Valley. The last place they get, the note says, okay, now you can go home. So a day or so later, they get another note, and he says, you know, I saw that you had police following us. I even saw you had the police officer in the car. I'm giving you one more chance, or I'm going to kill you, your family, and your branch managers. So again, this had been going on for a couple of weeks, and by then they had gotten a little bit more information. And finally, what they were able to obtain was a license plate of this vehicle. So one of our officers, an officer by the name of Perry Archer, and one of the G-men happened to be in the area of Atlantic Boulevard and Whittier Boulevard when they saw a vehicle with the exact license plate. Well, instead of getting into a police pursuit, they decided they're just going to ram this vehicle. So they ram this vehicle. Officer Perry Archer jumps out, runs to the front of the suspect vehicle. Just as he does, the suspect turns, opening the door, turns, and fired a round at Perry Archer. The bullet struck Perry Archer in the badge. The bullet went through the badge, saving his life, circled around his ribs, and lodged in his shoulder. And at the same time, Perry Archer was able to fire off a round, what would eventually be a mortal wound to the suspect. Again, I brought some of the memorabilia. If you get a chance, in the shadow box, I have the original badge worn by Perry Archer. I have the bullet that was taken from his shoulder, and I have the gun, which was a German Luger, that was used by the suspect in this case. So if you get a chance, and some of the other static displays have a better, more detailed description of this case. Well, the suspect was taken to the hospital. The only thing he would tell the authorities at the time, that his name was Jack Williams from Texas. That's all he would tell them. Well, at one point, Herbert Ivy and Mrs. Ivy are brought in to identify him, and Mrs. Ivy immediately said, yes, that's him. That's the man with the pig eyes. Well, he survived for a couple of weeks, and Jack Williams survived for a couple of weeks, took a turn for the worse, and he died. And they really don't think there was ever anybody else involved in this. They think it was just this lone man trying to extort the monies from Mr. Herbert D. Ivy. April 1930. Again, the City Club. Lawrence Gibbs, president of the City Club, appeared before council relative to the orange trees in the city being infested with various parasites and termites. I'm just telling you what's in the archives. On to the 1940s. You think traffic and parking have just recently become an issue in San Marino? 1948, City Council authorizes the first stop-and-go signals. Headlines in the paper, evidence of growth of what goes with the development was brought to the City Council meeting. The first in a series of signals will be installed at the intersection of Los Robles and Mission. The action urged immediately placement of these to safeguard pedestrians. 1949 headlines, adequate parking is a grave concern to business firms. Reverberations were heard throughout the community. The biggest issue facing the city in 1949. Some suggested all-day parking was bad. Some suggested time limits should be set. Housewives had their say. So, you can be reassured that we've been working on this for 63 years now. I know Councilman Ward is here tonight, so I have it on good authority that we're close to a solution, probably within a decade or two. You know, this is just more traffic stuff. You know, perhaps no other incident has brought so much grief and at the same time brought so many together. On the evening of Friday, April 8th, 1949, Kathy Fiscus was playing with her 9-year-old sister, Barbara, in a field when she fell into a 14-inch wide abandoned water shaft. The attempted rescue, broadcast live on KTLA, was a landmark event in American television. This was the first live, continuous production. Stan Chambers was on site throughout the entire event. Many of you may recall and heard Stan when he came and spoke at Historical Society a number of years ago. I believe he's also spoken here at City Club. The location of the well is on the upper field of the high school. It's pretty much unmarked except for a cap covering the well. Kathy is buried at Glen Abbey Memorial Park in Bonita, California. And on her inscription, the marker reads, "One little girl who united the world for a moment." And we have a memorial here at our own Kroll Public Library, if you've had an opportunity to see that. All right, on to the 1950s. How many of you remember Woody and Eddie's? I do. In fact, I remember giving a few residents a ride home after stopping them, having left Woody and Eddie's, spending a few hours there. I was a young baby-faced officer at the time, but on a serious note, in 1957, Woody and Eddie's was held up, and in the botched robbery attempt, a shootout occurred, killing a deputy sheriff and one of the suspects. One of the bartenders and also one of the waitresses were critically injured, and it was one of the first deputy sheriffs killed in this area in many years, and was at the time it was well noted, and it was a very sad event. And I think over here on one of the static events I have that as well. On to the 1960s. Star News headlines: Valley cracks down. Police have cracked down on the San Marino gift shop and confiscated over 826 items that were classified as obscene. Items included cards, pamphlets, and other items were taken from the House of Zog at 2318 Huntington. The next morning, the store's front windows were all covered in black curtains. 1973, there was a police officer shooting in here in San Marino. Many of you may remember Officer Rodney Boyer. Officer Rodney Boyer confronted a bank robbery suspect at the Security Pacific Bank at the corner of Huntington Drive and Granada. As Officer Boyer exited his car and confronted this suspect, the suspect fired 9 times at Officer Boyer, missing him. Officer Boyer leveled his shotgun with 1 round, killed the suspect instantly. I don't know, many of you may remember Officer Boyer. When he retired, Rodney would ride his bicycle throughout the community. He used to stop by City Hall, the police station. I'd see him at Lacey Park. Rodney was a great guy in this community, and he never had any bad feelings about this shooting. He just was very grateful that no one else was injured in this. 1980s, a few little minor scandals occurring at the police station. You know, during the late 70s, early 80s, it was not uncommon for officers to confiscate kegs of beer at rowdy juvenile parties here in San Marino. So the officers would confiscate these kegs of beer, bring them back to the police station, and they'd put them in what they called at the time the police lounge. This was a small building offside the parking lot away from the main police building. And when these officers got off from work in the morning, they would go out and they would consume the beverages lest they fall back into the hands of these rowdy juveniles. Well, of course, this would never happen today. And I can tell these officers it won't be happening anytime soon. You know, I can tell you as a chief, one of the phone calls I receive that I know is not going to go well is a person getting a parking ticket. One lady in 1984, I was here, kind of took this to a new level. She was upset that the chief would not void her parking ticket, so she left the station. She came back several hours later, just as it was getting dark, and she dumped at least a gallon's worth of gasoline in the police lobby and threw a match. Fortunately, the police, or the fire department was again right next door, were able to come. It was contained just to our lobby. She was trying to burn down the police station over a parking ticket. Extinguish the flames. Our officers went in pursuit of this woman down Huntington Drive, where she, exceeded 70 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour down Huntington. She crashed near about Huntington Old Mill. Fortunately, she wasn't killed. However, our officers did arrest her, and she was prosecuted over a parking ticket. You know, some tragedies are so big and so instructive that their age doesn't reduce the importance of the event. On February 1988, the deadliest shootout in DEA history occurred in San Marino. I'm sure some of you remember that and know about that. The event began in Monterey Park, where a number of Monterey Park undercover officers, along with some DEA agents, met with 6 Thai nationals to purchase 90 pounds of heroin. They got together and they decided that they were going to meet and do this exchange on Marengo, just north of Los Robles, just outside of San Marino. So the Monterey Park undercover officers and the DEA officers kind of set up a perimeter so they could watch the undercover officers as they did the buy, and as soon as the buy was done, they had the heroin, they were going to arrest these Thai nationals. So they had a lot of eyes and they had the area secured. Well, the Thai drug dealers never intended to bring any heroin. When they showed up, when they got into the car with the DEA agents, they immediately executed them, shooting them in the head, both DEA agents. As all of the surrounding officers, undercover officers, watched in horror as their partners were shot and killed. There was an immediate pursuit, which came down down Marengo to Los Robles, made a left turn on Monterey Road. There were 2 cars with these Thai nationals. One car crashed somewhere near the Southwestern Academy. The other car continued on where it finally crashed down near Old Mill Road. The first car, the suspects were arrested. 2 suspects were arrested without incident. In the second, there was a firefight. And as officers from the San Marino Police Department rolled up, there were DEA agents standing on the hood of the suspect's car firing in through the windshield at these suspects as they had been shooting back at the DEA office. They were not going to be taken alive. 2 of the suspects were killed. But in the end, two officers, two DEA agents had been shot and killed. This case is still used in some of the academies as an instructive case on surveillance and some of the tactics that were used. It was just a tragic event. In the 80s, another drug story. 1989, Jorge Roca Suarez, a reputed Bolivia drug lord, lived in his 19-room mansion at 1401 Old Mill Road. It's at the corner of Old Mill and Chelsea, north of Huntington. Federal law enforcement, along with members of the San Marino Police Department, I was one, conducted and served a search arrest warrant on the home. You know, I remember this was interesting. I was asked to be part of the search of the home, and then we each took certain areas, and as I went down this hallway, I opened a closet, and in this closet was this kind of duffel bag thing. I opened this duffel bag, and I had never seen so much cash. It was later determined there was well over $1 million in cash in this duffel bag. And they called them back then, it would be called like a go bag. And the reputed drug lords, what they'd do is if they had to leave in a hurry, they'd grab this duffel bag and they'd get out of town and they'd have at least $1 million in cash with them. You know, on to the 90s. This was a time of gangs trying to get a foothold in San Marino. And in 1993, perhaps one of the most heinous crimes in San Marino was the Lombardi Place shooting. This started out as a graduation party, what we called at the time a flyer party, where it was just essentially getting out to the community, up into people in Pasadena, everywhere, just we're having a party. Well, what happened was some gang members tried to get into this party early on, but were turned away. And apparently some people who were running the disc jockey system knew that these were gang members and mentioned to the people hosting the party that, hey, you don't want these people here. They're bad news. They don't need to be here. So they turned them away. Well, several hours later, they returned. They walked into the backyard with 2 automatic weapons and opened fire. They hit 9 kids. 2 of them were killed instantly, and the rest survived. At the sentencing, the judge said only by the grace of God there were not 9 people killed in this instance. All 4 of the individuals were sentenced, and as far as I know, they still remain in jail. Again, in March 2000, headlines read, 7 charged in the San Marino kidnapping. This ordeal began about 2:30 p.m. on March 20th when 2 masked men forced their way into a San Marino residence. They used a blanket and telephone cord to tie her up a nanny while they whisked away an 18-month-old child. Once freed, the nanny was able to call the parents, who had a business down in Los Angeles, who in turn called the San Marino Police Department. Having been the lead investigator of a previous kidnapping, I worked and made an immediate phone call to some people I knew at the FBI. We opened up a command center within at the San Marino Police Station, and this began a 21-day event. We waited for the first phone call. The ransom demand was $1.5 million in cash. They would call us back with details of where to drop the money. Several days went by. We're trying to gather the money together. We were able to gather approximately $900,000 in cash. We waited for the phone calls, and by then the FBI, we had very good tracking on being able to track these phone lines when they would come in. We had a sense that all these phones, or we knew that all these phone calls were coming from Los Angeles near the Echo Park area. So what we did is we waited for the phone calls to come, and we would just keep people in the area and then try and get as quickly as we could once we were able to identify which phone, these were pay phones that were being used. On 2 attempts, we just nearly missed them. In fact, officers that arrived, they saw that the receiver was still dangling at the time. And instead of waiting to get forensics down there, officers would take essentially bolt cutters, and they just cut the receivers right off of the pay phones and brought them back to check and see if we could find any type of latent prints. Well, eventually we got a phone call saying that you've got one chance. This is where we want the money delivered. It ended up being to a strip mall out in Roland Heights area. We were to dump this money into a big trash bin at the rear of this strip mall, and we would wait for a phone call. So as we had officers surround this area, kind of staying back so we wouldn't be identified, we waited, and probably within an hour or so, we see a person come out from behind the strip mall, walks over to the dumpster with a bag, opens the dumpster, goes to put a small bag of trash in, looks around, reaches in, pulls out the duffel bag. We felt we have our man. So we tracked this individual to a mall. We kind of coordinate a perimeter to wait. We finally go in. It turns out this individual was a security guard at this strip mall, and he just happened to find this duffel bag of money. So here we are with another whole night's worth of investigation trying to track this money down because he divvied it up with his 4 buddies. So we have our main investigation going on with the kidnapping, and then we have the secondary investigation going on. We were able, all night long, we were able to finally get these 4 individuals. We were able to get all the cash back except for $1,000. We don't know whatever happened to it. But our hearts about dropped when we got the phone call from the suspects telling us that we didn't make the drop. We didn't leave the money. And they said, to show you we really mean business, we're going to cut off one of the child's fingers and send it to you. You can't imagine how we all felt. We'd been going on for nearly 20 days at this time. 2 days later, they called us back and said, we'll give you one more chance. And again, to make this quick, we were able to triangulate using the technology we had with phones. And on that last phone call, we had officers close enough. We were able to make an arrest. That person, under interrogation, did tell us where the child was. We were able to return the child unharmed to his parents. But again, this lasted 21 days. You know, September 11th, 2001 stands as a defining event of the 21st century. 9/11 impacted us all. You know, I've heard it said 9/11 remains puzzling. It was the worst day, and it was the best day. It was the worst day because of the incomprehensible death, destruction, and evil. Soon after, very soon after, we all recognized the threat that extremist terrorism presented. September 11th was also the best day because it put on display the very finest in human instincts: compassion, kindness, courage, selflessness. Today, San Marino is stronger. We are safer, and we are a better prepared city. Well, it's getting late, and we're kind of up to the present. Maybe I'll have to continue on with a part 2 because there's a lot more to talk to you about. But if you realize that I skipped over some particular events or scandals or crimes, part of it is due to my time constraints, and then secondly, I did it because, you know, I don't want to embarrass any members of the community. Maybe next time. So if I didn't mention a particular event, maybe it was intentional. In closing, San Marino has been very blessed due to the foresight and the decisions made by its residents. You know, younger families with new traditions, different backgrounds are moving in. The once rural island is now in the midst of larger urban communities. But I can promise you, your police department will always be there for you. We'll make this city safer and a better place to raise your children. I thank you.
We do have time for a couple of questions.
Okay.
Because I think people are dying to ask some questions. I know I've got a couple as well. So does anybody have any questions?
Did we ever get any money from that place on the old bill where they run the road as a compensation for part of the
Yeah, we received a small amount of what they call asset seizure monies from that. We did. We did. And any other questions? Yes, in the back. She asked, is any of this information that I provided tonight is in a book form to present it? Probably some of the earlier information I gave you and much more is in the Centennial book. So if you haven't had an opportunity to take a look or purchase that. I've also placed a lot of these cases and such in these static displays. They'll be here for you to take a look at if you'd like. They'll probably be at some of the other Centennial events that we have throughout the city. I'll be happy to stay afterwards and take any of your questions. And if you haven't had a chance to look at some of the static displays, I ask that you do. They're pretty neat. Yes, one more question.
If it isn't an ongoing investigation, what happened with the pharmacy?
That is not a San Marino investigation, so we do not have jurisdiction over that case. So I don't know specifically.
Two questions that you don't have to answer right now. When was the last time the burial ordinance was enforced? And I still have a deposit on one of those kegs.
That was yours.
On behalf of the City Club. And to thank you for tonight, and to thank you for your career and all you've done for the city. Please accept this from the San Marino City Club.
Thank you very much.
Well, I just have two takeaways from Chief Harrigan's talk. Number one, City Club members, go treasure hunting. Number two, I guess I have to continue City Club's tradition, so I will prepare a termite case and present to the City Council sometime. So this will conclude our program tonight, so thank you for coming. The next dinner meeting is on March 19th. So have a great night. Thank you.
Interesting thought. Okay.